Let's jump right into today's explainer. We're unpacking a deeply personal, step-by-step emotional journey that unfolds over the course of a single school year. Based on an incredibly insightful account of a teacher navigating the intense highs and absolute lows of burnout, we aren't just crunching numbers today. We're looking at a raw human experience. We're going to map out the exact and often completely unspoken trajectory that so many educators find themselves on. Literally starting from the bright, shiny optimism of a new academic year, all the way down to the grueling reality of administrative pressure and the immense personal cost of the profession. Let's get into it. The hollow exhaustion of mid-year fatigue. I mean, just listen to that phrase. I want to plunge you right into the feeling of burnout with this cold open. Let that really sink in for a second. It's heavy, right? Before we jump back to how it all begins, we need to feel the absolute gravity of this emotional destination. We're not just talking about being tired after a long Tuesday. No, it's a very specific, hollow type of exhaustion that settles deep in your bones when the year is only halfway done. This right here, this is where the journey we're analyzing today ultimately leads. Okay, let's dive into this from the very start. To truly understand that deep exhaustion we just looked at, we have to hit the reset button and go back to the chronological beginning. Every single school year kicks off with Phase 1, the August optimism. This is the baseline of hope. It's the fresh start, you know? The newly decorated classrooms, the crisp lesson plans, the genuine, unbridled excitement to go out there and shape young minds. It's a period totally defined by high energy and a profound sense of purpose. And understanding this baseline is absolutely crucial because you really can't measure how far someone falls until you know exactly how high they were standing to begin with. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what I mean. When we contrast the starting line directly with the destination, you can see the sheer jarring drop-off between these two psychological states. Over on the left, we've got that bright August optimism, just full of potential and energy. On the right, the crushing reality of mid-year fatigue. Looking at them side by side, it honestly feels like we're looking at two completely different professions, doesn't it? But the startling truth from our source material is that these two realities exist within the exact same person, just a few short months apart. But here's the thing. This massive psychological change doesn't just happen overnight. You don't just wake up one morning and suddenly flip from energized to completely burnt out. The source material frames this in a very specific, really powerful way, a suffocating transition. Phase 2 is where the air slowly, almost imperceptibly, starts leaving the room. It's a gradual process that methodically drains the educator's spirit day by day, week by agonizing week. It's that creeping heavy realization that the bright optimism of August is slowly being overshadowed by the relentless realities of the job. Now, what's really fascinating here is how we can literally map this descent month by month as the school year progresses. Check out the timeline. We start up at the peak in August with high optimism. Then, right around October, when that initial back-to-school adrenaline wears off and the real grind sets in, we hit that suffocating transition. And by December, as the calendar year wraps up, the descent bottoms out completely into that hollow exhaustion. It's an incredibly predictable, almost systemic timeline of emotional depletion. So let's take a second to fully unpack this phrase from our source text, hollow exhaustion. We defined it here as a deep, pervasive, mid-year fatigue that empties one's emotional and physical reserves. I really want to emphasize that this goes far, far beyond just normal tiredness. Like, when you're normally tired, a good night's sleep fixes it. A relaxed weekend fixes it. But hollow implies at the very core of your energy, your emotional reserve, your passion, your capacity to literally just care has been completely scooped out. It's a profound emptiness. But what actually causes this emptiness, right? Why does this transition even happen? Well, we're going to shift our focus now to the external triggers driving this timeline downward. Phase 3 introduces us to the crushing weight of the system itself, drowning in demands. And notice, the author doesn't just mention a heavy workload. They specifically highlight drowning in administrative demands. This tells us something huge. It means the burnout isn't necessarily coming from the act of teaching itself, but from the massive, heavy systemic scaffolding built all around it. Let's look at exactly what constitutes those systemic pressures. Think about these compounding administrative demands. Endless paperwork, top-down directives, constant meetings, mandatory reporting, endless paperwork, top-down directives, constant meetings, mandatory reporting. I mean, just hearing it back to back like that is exhausting, isn't it? I'm firing off those simulated pressures rapidly to mimic exactly what the author is describing, that claustrophobic, suffocating feeling of literally drowning in an unceasing wave of administrative tasks that pull you completely away from what you actually signed up to do. Which brings us to a really heartbreaking transition. We move from the external administrative pressures we were just looking at directly into the devastating internal emotional toll it creates. Phase 4, the guilt of failing. The source text explicitly links the act of drowning in administrative demands with the act of confronting the intense guilt of failing students. See, when the system demands absolutely all of your time for paperwork and meetings, something has to give. And for a dedicated educator, realizing that what's giving is the actual quality of your students' education, that creates an unbearable internal conflict. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the mechanics of that vicious cycle work. Step 1, the teacher is drowning in administrative demands. Step 2, because of those demands, they inherently have way less time and less emotional bandwidth for actual teaching. Step 3, this direct lack of time forces the teacher to confront the intense guilt of failing their students. The administration's demands are directly manufacturing that guilt. The educator is placed in a mathematically impossible situation where succeeding at the bureaucracy means feeling like you're completely failing the very kids you set out to help back in August. And this vicious cycle eventually pushes us to the narrative's true climax, Phase 5. This is the exact turning point where the emotional damage threatens to become permanent. When you mix profound exhaustion with inescapable guilt, the original emotion that brought you to the profession in the first place begins to mutate. The passion doesn't just quietly disappear or fade away. No, it transforms into something much darker. Passion curdled into resentment. The author maps these specific moments with this incredibly visceral phrasing. Just let that hang in the air for a second. Curdled. It evokes something that was once fresh and nourishing, like milk, right? Turning sour, toxic, and totally impossible to consume. Understanding this intense emotional shift matters to absolutely everyone because it's the ultimate tragedy of universal workplace burnout. It's not just losing your love for a job, it is actively resenting the thing you once cared about the most. Once the passion has curdled, we arrive at the final crossroads. Phase 6, resilience or walking away. As the school year violently grinds on, this is the ultimate, agonizing choice that every single burnt-out teacher must eventually face. There is literally no middle ground left. You either find a way to absorb the relentless pressure of the system, or you decide that you simply cannot stay within it anymore. Notice these two opposing forces side by side. On the left, professional resilience. On the right, walking away to survive. The author describes seeking a fragile line between the two. What's absolutely critical here is the phrasing on the right side, the necessity of walking away to survive. This drastically reframes the whole narrative of quitting. Quitting isn't framed as a failure or some lack of dedication. It's highlighted as an act of vital self-preservation. When the environment becomes that suffocating, leaving is literally how you survive. So, the crucial point is how we define this concept of staying. Professional resilience in this undeniably harsh context is defined as the fragile ability to withstand the systemic pressures and emotional lows of the education system without breaking. And the author specifically calls it a fragile line. This really makes us pause and question things, doesn't it? Is this type of resilience actually a sign of professional strength that we should be celebrating? Or is it merely a tragic endurance test? Are we just praising people for their ability to survive an environment that shouldn't be that hostile in the first place? Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, leaving you with this unresolved, provocative thought. Where exactly is the fragile line between professional resilience and the necessity of walking away to survive? It's a question that doesn't just define a single teacher's school year. It challenges our fundamental assumptions about what we truly ask of our educators. When we demand resilience, what are we really asking them to endure? Think about that fragile line the next time you consider the realities of our education system. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring this absolutely vital topic.